When passion, stardom, and controversy crash into each other, the result is a drama the world can't stop watching. And few modern tales embody that collision, more vividly than the saga of Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. What started as a whirlwind of red carpet romance and cinematic sparkle soon unraveled into one of the most public and polarizing court battles in Hollywood history. Their story moved far beyond the boundaries of a simple breakup. It became a global debate over truth, image, and the fragile balance of power in the spotlight. Johnny Depp has long been more than just a familiar face on the big screen. For decades he shaped the spirit of Hollywood with an almost rebellious magnetism. He wasn't merely Captain Jack Sparrow or the enigmatic Edward Scissorhands, he was a symbol of artistic unpredictability. Depp built a career on defying expectations, on turning every role into an exploration of mystery and edge. Off-screen, he radiated the same restless creativity, a musician at heart, an artist by instinct, a man who seemed to carry fame lightly even while standing squarely in its brightest glare. Amber Heard was a rising star when their paths crossed. Younger, bold, outspoken, and ambitious. She'd appeared in films like Never Back Down and The Rum Diary. She had the look, the voice, and the presence that made Hollywood pay attention. She was fashionable, glamorous, and willing to speak out on issues she believed in. On the set of The Rum Diary in 2009, Johnny and Amber met, and from that moment something clicked. Chemistry spilled over from the cameras into real life. What began as co-stars turned into a love story, at least at first. For the outside world, the early days looked like a dream. Red carpet appearances, smiles and laughter, paparazzi capturing what seemed like a couple who had it all: fame, money, love, and the kind of lifestyle that only Hollywood could provide. By 2015 they were married, and for many fans, it seemed like the perfect match. The mysterious Hollywood veteran and the bold rising actress. It had the makings of a fairy tale. But as we've learned so many times, fairy tales in Hollywood are rarely what they seem. Behind closed doors, things weren't perfect. Not even close. Arguments, accusations, anger. It didn't take long for the cracks to start showing. In 2016, just a year after they tied the knot, Amber filed for divorce. But it wasn't just a divorce. She also filed a restraining order, accusing Johnny of abuse. Suddenly, the fairy tale love story turned into a public scandal. Photos of bruises appeared in headlines. Statements were released. Friends and lawyers spoke out. And the public? The public didn't know what to believe. Some stood firmly with Amber, seeing her as a victim speaking out against one of the biggest men in Hollywood. Others defended Johnny, pointing to his decades of work and his reputation as someone beloved by colleagues. It didn't take long for this to become bigger than just a celebrity breakup. It turned into a cultural conversation about abuse, about gender, about power, and about who gets believed in situations like these. For Johnny, it was devastating. Not just emotionally, but professionally. Suddenly, his image as one of Hollywood's most bankable stars was under attack. For Amber, it catapulted her into the spotlight in ways she may never have imagined, both as a voice for survivors, but also as a lightning rod for criticism. The divorce was finalized, but the story didn't end there. In fact, it was only just beginning. In 2018, Amber wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post. She never used Johnny's name, but she described herself as a public figure representing domestic abuse. For many readers, the implication was clear. She was talking about Johnny, and for Johnny, that was the breaking point. He said the article destroyed his career. Studios backed away from him. He lost movie roles. Disney distanced itself from him in the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. Warner Brothers cut ties with him in the Fantastic Beasts series. For an actor who had built decades of reputation, it felt like everything was falling apart. That's when Johnny decided to fight back. First, he sued a British tabloid for calling him a wife-beater. That case didn't go his way. He lost, and for many, that seemed like proof his career might be over. But Johnny wasn't done. In 2019, he filed the defamation lawsuit against Amber directly. She countersued, and suddenly this wasn't just Hollywood gossip. It was an official legal war. By 2022, the world's eyes were on a courtroom in Fairfax, Virginia. Cameras were allowed inside, and that decision turned everything into a spectacle. This wasn't a private legal battle. This was a live event. Millions of people tuned in day after day, watching testimonies, listening to lawyers argue, seeing evidence presented in real time. TikTok exploded with clips. YouTube channels gained millions of views. Twitter turned into a constant debate. Even Instagram memes were created out of courtroom moments. What should have been a serious, private matter turned into entertainment, and the way people responded, it was unlike anything we've seen before. Viewers didn't just watch passively. They picked sides. Team Johnny trended. Team Amber trended. People dissected every expression, every tear, every glance. They debated who was lying, who was exaggerating, and who was telling the truth. The trial became bigger than itself. It wasn't just about Johnny Depp and Amber Heard anymore. It became about how the public consumes celebrity drama, how social media shapes opinions, and how justice can sometimes look like a reality TV show. Both Johnny and Amber testified. Johnny spoke about his upbringing, about substance use, about his love for Amber, and about what he claimed were false accusations that destroyed his life. Amber spoke about her pain, about the fear she said she lived through, and about the attacks she faced from Johnny's fans. Audio recordings were played. Shocking text messages were read aloud. Expert witnesses were brought in. Former friends, assistants, security guards, all were asked to share their stories. For weeks, it was non-stop revelations, and it wasn't easy to watch. Because beyond the headlines and the social media edits, these were two people whose private lives were being exposed in the most brutal way possible. Every argument, every mistake, every personal detail became part of the record. And the audience? The audience couldn't look away. When the verdict was finally announced, Johnny won most of his claims. The jury awarded him millions in damages. Amber won one of her counterclaims, but received much less. For Johnny, it was redemption, a chance to say he had been wronged. For Amber, it was devastating. She faced not just financial consequences, but also the weight of public backlash. But here's what's easy to forget. The verdict didn't really end the conversation. In fact, it only fueled it. Some celebrated Johnny's victory as justice. Others saw it as a failure of the system, arguing that Amber was unfairly vilified online. And that's the thing, this wasn't just about the courtroom. It was about how the world watched, commented, and judged in real time. Experts called it the first TikTok trial. It showed just how powerful social media is in shaping public opinion. In many ways, the audience outside the courtroom felt as important as the jury inside. Even after the trial, the ripple effects kept going. Johnny slowly returned to the spotlight. He appeared at Cannes in 2023, smiling and waving as cameras flashed. He talked about new projects. He went back to music, performing on stage, reconnecting with a part of himself that existed long before Hollywood fame. For many of his fans, it felt like a victory, not just legally, but personally. Amber, on the other hand, made a different choice. She stepped away from the Hollywood chaos. She moved to Spain with her daughter, living a quieter life. Away from the cameras. Away from the noise. Some called it retreat. Others called it peace. But whatever the reason, it was clear she wanted distance from the storm that had consumed so many years of her life. And here we are, still talking about it. Years later, people still debate what really happened. People still share clips from the trial. People still argue online about who was right and who was wrong. Because stories like this, stories about love, betrayal, fame, and downfall, they don't just end. They echo. Especially in the age of social media, no story ever truly goes away. The Depp Heard saga was more than just a Hollywood scandal. It was a mirror showing how we consume celebrity culture today. It was a reminder that behind every headline are real people, messy and flawed, trying to navigate love and fame in a world that never stops watching. Their love story started on a movie set, turned into marriage, dissolved into divorce, and then exploded into a trial that became a global phenomenon. It's a story only Hollywood could create, but it's also one that touched millions of people who saw pieces of their own relationships, their own struggles, reflected in the chaos. When people first heard about Johnny Depp and Amber Heard, it wasn't in the context of courtrooms, lawsuits, or leaked recordings. It was in the context of two stars crossing paths on a movie set. Back in 2009, Johnny was already a legend. His career was decades long, filled with iconic roles that shaped modern cinema. He had built an image of mystery, of artistry, of rebellion against Hollywood norms. He was a superstar who seemed almost untouchable. Amber, by contrast, was at the beginning stages of her rise. Young, ambitious, stylish, and vocal. When they met during the filming of The Rum Diary, it seemed like fate was bringing together two people from different worlds, merging them into one of those whirlwind Hollywood romances that fans love to imagine. At first, the romance looked perfect. Paparazzi photos showed smiles and hand-holding. Red carpet appearances painted the picture of glamour and intimacy. By the time they married in 2015, the story seemed like a modern fairy tale, the established Hollywood king with decades of fame marrying the bold, beautiful starlet stepping into her own spotlight. On the surface, it was a dream. But below the surface, it was a storm brewing. Within just a year, everything changed. In 2016, Amber filed for divorce and a restraining order alleging abuse. That single move set off a chain of events that transformed a private relationship into one of the most public battles the world has ever seen. Photos of bruises made headlines. Court filings became public. Friends gave statements. And suddenly everyone had an opinion. Some believed Amber wholeheartedly. Others believed Johnny. The rest were left confused, wondering what the truth really was. And this is where the story begins to reflect back on us, the audience. Because from the very beginning, it wasn't just about them. It was about how we consumed their story. Every detail, every whisper, every headline became content. Media outlets published endless stories. Fans debated online. People dug up old interviews, old photos, even analyzing body language in videos. What should have been a private matter between two people became a global conversation. Then came the lawsuits. First, Johnny sued a British tabloid that had called him a wife-beater. He lost. For many, that was a sign his career was over. Studios began pulling away. Disney distanced itself from him. Warner Bros. Cut him from Fantastic Beasts. For someone who had spent decades entertaining audiences and creating unforgettable characters, the fall from grace was brutal. But he wasn't finished. In 2019, Johnny sued Amber for defamation over her Washington Post op-ed, where she described herself as a survivor of abuse. She didn't mention his name, but everyone knew who she meant. That was the spark that lit the fuse. Amber countersued, and suddenly the stage was set for a showdown that the whole world would witness. By 2022, all eyes turned to Fairfax County, Virginia. The defamation trial wasn't just a legal proceeding. It was a media spectacle. Cameras were allowed inside, and that single decision changed everything. What should have been hours of quiet legal arguments turned into one of the most watched live events in recent memory. People weren't just reading headlines anymore. They were watching every second unfold in real time. Millions tuned in daily. YouTube channels streamed the trial nonstop. TikTok exploded with clips, often edited into dramatic or comedic memes. Twitter debates raged on. Even Instagram filled with memes, reaction videos, and quotes. The courtroom had become entertainment. The trial wasn't just being reported, it was being consumed like a series on Netflix, except it was real lives, real reputations, and real pain on display. And here's the thing. People didn't just watch. They took sides. Hashtags like Justice for Johnny trended globally. Fans created compilations of his smiles, his jokes, his moments of vulnerability on the stand. Others rallied behind Amber, pointing to her testimony, her tears, and her insistence that she had suffered abuse. It became less about the evidence and more about the narrative each side represented. The public wasn't just an audience, they were participants. They debated, judged, and even mocked. Social media became the courtroom of opinion, running parallel to the actual trial. The details were shocking. Recordings of fights. Text messages filled with dark, violent language. Photos, videos, expert testimonies, all laid bare for the world to dissect. The private life of two people had been ripped open and displayed like a reality show. And the world didn't look away. When the verdict finally arrived, the jury sided largely with Johnny. He was awarded millions in damages. Amber won one of her counterclaims, but far less. For Johnny, it was vindication, a chance to reclaim some of the reputation he felt he had lost. For Amber, it was devastating, not just financially, but also in terms of public image. But here's where the mirror comes in again. Because even after the verdict, the arguments didn't stop. Some celebrated Johnny's victory as justice. Others argued it sent the wrong message, that survivors would be afraid to speak out. And social media? Social media kept the fire burning. Edits, memes, debates, they never stopped. The story didn't end with the verdict. It simply moved into a new phase. Johnny began to rebuild. He returned to the spotlight, appearing at Cannes in 2023, receiving standing ovations, smiling for cameras again. He leaned into music, a lifelong passion, touring and performing, reconnecting with fans in a way that seemed to bring him peace. For his supporters, it was a triumph. Proof that he had survived the storm and come out stronger. Amber, meanwhile, made a different choice. She stepped away. She moved to Spain with her daughter, choosing a quieter, more private life. Away from Hollywood, away from the cameras, away from the chaos. For some, it looked like retreat. For others, it looked like healing. Whatever the reason, it was clear she no longer wanted to be at the center of the world's gaze, and that, in itself, tells you something about the power of fame. Fame builds people up, but it also exposes them in ways that can be unbearable. Johnny and Amber's story wasn't just about love gone wrong. It was about what happens when private struggles collide with public image, when the world decides it has the right to watch, judge, and comment on every detail. For millions of people watching, this saga wasn't just entertainment. It was relatable in ways they didn't expect. People saw their own messy breakups, their own toxic arguments, their own struggles with truth and lies reflected in the chaos. Others saw how easily narratives can be shaped by perception, how quickly people can pick sides based on charisma, appearance, or even a single viral clip. It wasn't just Hollywood. It was human nature playing out on the biggest stage possible. And maybe that's why we couldn't look away. Because in the end, the Depp Heard trial wasn't simply about two celebrities. It was about all of us. About the way we consume stories. About the way we judge. About the way we project our own beliefs, experiences, and biases onto the lives of strangers. It was a scandal, yes. But it was also a mirror. And sometimes what we see in the mirror is more unsettling than what's being reflected. This is why people are still talking about it today. Why clips are still shared. Why debates still happen. Because stories like this don't just disappear. They echo, they linger. And in the age of social media, no story ever truly ends. Especially not one like this. So the question becomes, was this about justice, or was it about entertainment? Did we learn the truth, or did we just watch another Hollywood circus dressed up as a courtroom battle? That's for you to decide. What do you think? Was this trial justice served? Or was it just another example of how fame turns everything into a spectacle? I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you're curious about more of Johnny Depp's story, about how he's transformed and what's next for him, check out my other video where we dive deep into his life after the trial. And before you head there, don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss what's coming next. Because if there's one thing Hollywood guarantees, it's that there will always be another story waiting.